Brazil is a pretty epic movie, but before I go ahead and try to recommend it, I have to tell you which version of the film I'm recommending because there are versions. There's three that Universal Studios ended up producing. You have the original director's cut, which clocks in at 2.5 hours. Then you have the edited down version of that movie that clocks in at 2 hours and 12 something minutes. And with that cut, it supposedly provides a slightly cleaner experience than the original. Then lastly, you have the more accessible version that was made to appeal to the more mainstream audience by adding a more satisfying ending and getting rid of that extensive runtime by cutting it down to just an hour and a half. And I've never seen the 2 hours and 12-minute cut of the movie, but I have seen the other two versions. And I can honestly say without a doubt that the hour and a half cut of the movie is ironically and abysmally incomprehensible compared to the original cut of the movie. And as long as that original cut that is still a version I recommend watching because that extensive runtime really does flesh out the fantastical and Orwellian nature of this movie. The reason why there's even 3 cuts of the film is because the producers have said that there's a lot going on in this film, which there is. There's a lot of themes, characters, and locations we're jumping to and from. And maybe it is too much for your typical mainstream audience to get a good grasp on, but even from our first watch, I think something that still stands out strongly and will leave an impression on you would have to be that fantastical presentation. The world of Brazil and the incredibly unique look that it has is probably the most accessible aspect. It's just impressive how many sets and locations the film takes place at and how they've managed to make them vary in looks and sizes and colors for the duration of these 2.5 hours. There's just a lot of iconic imagery you get from the whole production of the film, albeit the sets or the special effects and just the practicality of it all, especially with the massive scale it's presented at. You could even compare the scale of production to that of Blade Runners, and if you're into that, you'd probably be into this too. But in terms of comparisons, that's as far as they go because tonally, they're on completely different ends of the spectrum, and in all honesty, I think I prefer Brazil over Blade Runner because of that. To accompany this absurd world, we get an absurd narrative. Brazil takes place in the future or in this alternate reality where the government has become bureaucratically anal about the people it's governing. People which have become over-reliant on the inefficient technology of the time and have decided to make general consumerism their day-to-day pastime. And stuck in the cyclical nature of this world is our main protagonist, Sam Lowry. And we follow him as he tries to escape the tedium of his mundane job when he quite literally runs into his dream girl. And from there on, the story pretty much turns into your basic hero's journey, where the brave knight tries to rescue the damsel in distress with some Kafka-esque philosophy thrown in there too. And if you're dumb like me, you won't be able to pick up on those anti-totalitarian themes and whatnot on your first watch. But one thing you will pick up on is this very absurdist tone the movie has. The characters in the movie are some of the most bizarre characters I've ever seen, and a lot of them are so much larger than life. So much so that they kind of overshadow our main protagonist at times. I think Jonathan Pryce does a good job at playing this aloof character, but I can understand someone saying that this character is kind of one note with only one goal in mind. But I think that says a lot about the character and the people of this world and how they are systemically stuck in this passive and over-consumerist nature. Plus, that blank nature of his works really well for the audience to be able to impose themselves onto him and try to empathize with him more. Sam very much is the underdog of the movie. You see him having to deal with some sort of inconvenience at every turn when he interacts with all these characters. And those side characters don't really have the amount of screen time as Sam Lowry does, but regardless, they still manage to be as memorable as he is. Whether it's the mother with the weird outfits, or the cameo from the fucking Mario Brothers, or the lady whose plastic surgery gets worse every time you see her, or the hood rat kids you see playing a dark game of interrogation outside that one building, or Sam's boss, or his future office neighbor. But none of them are as cool as Robert De Niro's performance as Mr. Tuttle. All my life I've seen De Niro take on all these dramatic character roles, and seeing him take on this really goofy character is really refreshing. It makes me wish that there were more roles like this that De Niro would take on. He's really charismatic, and there's this physical performance he brings to this part that gives him like a real presence, but I'm kind of digressing. I mentioned earlier how this movie is kind of a hero's journey, but that comparison wouldn't even be possible to make if the music wasn't involved. The music really does a great job at establishing and balancing the goofy yet dark tone the film has while relying on like one motif. The original song this soundtrack is inspired by is called Aquarela do Brasil, written and created by Sir Eddie Barroso, if I'm pronouncing that right. It's a really festive holiday type song, you know? And somehow the film still manages to do a really great job at making it fit in pretty much every scene. Like the beginning of the film starts off with a kind of muted version of the song with some vocals. Then we see our protagonists go about their day and you hear the same motif collaborating with another motif from that one song called The Typewriter. And then there's moments in the film where the scenes have this noirish tone to them, so that motif is now played in sax. Then when you get to those dream sequences, the song gets turned into this triumphant, sweeping score, and it really does elevate those scenes into this really epic degree, which they are. Capoeira do Brasil is used in this really goofy way in the movie, and it really does encapsulate the state of mind of our protagonist. There's just this juxtaposition between what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing that I just really enjoy. And it parallels nicely to the main narrative of the movie. In regards to the main protagonist, another parallel could be made when you compare to the character arcs of Sam Lowry and the Tale of Icarus. For those of you who don't know what the Tale of Daedalus and Icarus is, just look it up, man, I don't know. But the point being of that tale is that the downfall of Icarus was basically a result of his own ego and hubris. And in the movie, we see Sam face the same fatalistic result as he kind of deserved. And I like to think that's the main crux of the film. Sam lets himself inhabit this world where he is rewarded highly for living along this apathetic lifestyle where, so long as he falls in line and serves the system his government has set up for him, he will be rewarded with this life of convenience, completely oblivious to the two-faced nature of the system when people choose not to fall in line. The supposed terrorists you hear faint glimmers of in the film, they're probably the only morally correct people for being aware of this issue and trying to do something about it. Well, that's one of the theories I've come up with. The other theory I have in mind is that maybe this terrorist group you hear of in the movie don't really even exist. Maybe they're nothing but an idea this government has constructed so that they can emotionally manipulate the people they're trying to govern and get them to believe that they're the good guys, by comparison of course. Maybe that's how this society has managed to devolve into this state of blissful ignorance, including Sam. The cool thing is, I guess, is that Sam does eventually become aware of this issue and tries to confront it. But by the time he does, like Icarus, he tries to ascend from the shackles of his oppressors, only to be lobotomized because he's become another stuck-out peg for this government to hammer down on. I think that's why the last shot of the movie leaves such an impression on me. And by the way, you don't even get that poignant ending in the hour-and-a-half version of the film. That version of the film ends with Sam driving into the horizon with the girl of his dreams, and honestly, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So, yeah man, watch this, Brazil. It's pretty epic.